Good evening and welcome to the Telegraph EU debate in association with the Huffington Post and powered by YouTube. I'm Asma Mir and we're here in YouTube's headquarters in the heart of London with just 8 days to go before British voters decide on the most important question for a generation: in or out of the European Union. Here to debate that question we have on my right Boris Johnson, former London Mayor, Conservative MP, Telegraph columnist and de facto leader of the Leave campaign. Next to Boris, we have Employment Minister Priti Patel, whose parents came to the UK from Uganda as immigrants. Priti was born in London and went to the same school, by the way, in Watford as another of our panellists, Liz Kendall. So, for the Remain campaign, on my left, Liz Kendall, who became a Labour MP in 2010 and came fourth in last year's Labour leadership contest. The former head girl has challenged her fellow pupil Priti Patel to go back to their old school to debate the EU vote because she says it's a decision that should be debated by Watford girls, not just Bullingdon boys. A reference to the Oxford Drinking Club, of course, whose members included Boris Johnson. And with Liz, the former First Minister of Scotland and former leader of the Scottish National Party, Alex Salmond, who is now a Member of Parliament at Westminster. Now, the future of Scotland very much central to this debate, of course, with many saying that a vote to leave could trigger another Scottish independence referendum and ultimately Scotland leaving the Union. Now, we'll have questions from YouTubers and our invited audience of Telegraph readers, Huffington Post bloggers and expert journalists from both organisations. And remember that you can join the debate at #EUDebate. Please join the fray because with panellists like these, I think it's probably a safe bet to say it's going to get lively. Let's go straight to our first question then, and it's from Tony Smith. Tony, your question.
Thank you. Good evening. Net immigration to the United Kingdom is currently equivalent to adding the population of Newcastle upon Tyne each year. Given the cost and time needed to increase water reservoir capacity, sewage plants, electricity generation, hospital and school places, train GPs over 10 years, build roads and housing in our small island, can the panel say what annual rate of net immigration to the UK is actually practical for us to cope with? And if they cannot so say, is it not irresponsible to advocate uncontrolled immigration?
Boris Johnson, what is an acceptable level of immigration?
Well, first of all, let me say that I am pro-immigration in the sense that I'm the beneficiary of this country's generosity to my Turkish great-grandfather many years ago. He came in 1912 to Wimbledon, as it happened. I don't know quite why, but that's where he ended up. And very lucky my family was. And I think London benefits massively, has benefited massively from immigration. But what you say so is quite right. We're now running at a net rate of 333,000 a year, city the size of Newcastle. Net immigration from the European Union is running at about 184,000 last year. I think most people in this country feel that is very high indeed and probably too high. And if you look at the recent projections from Migration Watch, if we go on at this rate, the population will pretty rapidly get to about 80 million people in the next few decades.
So if you had to put a figure on it, Boris Johnson, what would you put?
I would say that we need to go lower, but that the only way to do that is to take back control of our immigration policy.
How low?
At present,
lower, how low?
Get back to a manageable figure, and I'm not going to give a.
No, Nigel Farage said 30 or 40,000. Would you agree with that?
I think what you want is a figure that corresponds to the needs of British industry and business and to the economy. And at the moment, we've got a system which allows in huge numbers of people who do not even have a job offer. 77,000 people came last year who had no job to go to from the European Union. And I don't think, so just if you subtract 77,000 from 184,000, you can see you're already making some serious reductions. I think that you need to get to the position that the Prime Minister and indeed other members of the government said we should get to before the renegotiations began, and make sure that people can't come here unless they have a job to come to. I think that is reasonable.
Okay.
And I would also like an Australian
Very
style, if I
quickly.
may finish quickly, an Australian style points-based system.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
That is fair to everyone.
Liz Kendall, Nigel Farage has talked about 30 or 40,000 being an acceptable limit, acceptable number, back to the kind of levels of the 60s and the 70s. It's currently running at 300,000. Is 300,000 too high?
Well, I'm not going to set a number on it either. I think one of the reasons why people are so fed up with politics and politicians is they make promises they don't end up keeping. You are right that immigration does bring pressures, and I think those have to be dealt with. Coming here should be to come to work, to pay in before you take out. We need, I believe, to see more effort to make sure we have enough housing in parts of the country, and that the extra money migrants put into the system, I'd like to see more of that funding go to the areas that need it most. But I'm also going to be honest that sometimes we talk about immigration as if it is a disease, when migrants actually contribute a huge amount to this country. They do pay in more than they take out. Our NHS would struggle without the contribution.
Okay, let's go back to the questioner, Tony.
We're all in favour of immigration. I haven't met anyone who isn't in favour of immigration. I haven't met anyone who doesn't see the benefits. But the benefits to whom? Over the previous 2 years, nearly 1/2 of maternity units at some point have had to close their doors because they could not cope with demand. Are you saying to those pregnant women who had to drive to another maternity unit unexpectedly that it's not about whether immigration is good or bad in a moral sense? We're all in favour of immigration. We all love new people.
Okay.
Can I come back to that? I need to come back to that, sir, because you are more likely to be treated by someone who comes from the European Union to work in the NHS than you are to be behind them in the queue. It is simply not right to say the reason our NHS is struggling and under pressure is to do with migrants. You tend to be younger, healthier and of working age. The reason why our NHS is under pressure is we are having an ageing population, more people living with long-term and chronic conditions, and because, quite frankly, this government has cut the care service at home that elderly people...
Hang on that point.
That's the reason.
Tony, I will come back to you, I promise. Priti Patel, the squeeze... Tony, I will come back to you. Priti, that's the point that Liz is making, that the squeeze on public services that some people are experiencing is not just, or perhaps only, because of immigrants. It's because of cuts to the NHS and cuts to public services.
Well, let's be very clear about this. If we look back, not just over the last 2 years, but actually over the last 15 years in particular, we should acknowledge, and I think, you know, our government does as well, quite frankly, that our membership of the European Union means that we are not fully in control of our immigration policy. And I think that is the important point here to note. And on top of that, previous governments, and I think Liz will probably agree as well, previous Labour governments, you know, simply didn't anticipate the numbers of people through the Free Movement Directive in particular that came to the United Kingdom. And of course, yes, you use public services.
But you haven't answered Liz Kendall's point, which was that some of the pressure that the NHS and other public services are currently undergoing is because of cuts. Can you address that point?
Well, what I'd say is actually this is a failure of successive governments when it comes to not planning for that level of migration that came. The pressure that basically led to, yes, pressure on housing, public services, on school places. We've seen the Department of Education published figures today, again showing more pressures on school places. That applies to the NHS as well. And actually, it's a duty of government to be able to, you know, wake up to this and actually anticipate how we can provide the right level of public services.
It's the failure of successive governments.
Well, the gentleman said that we all like immigration, and you know, I wish that were true, but it's not. It's not in this campaign. And it's not in this campaign because immigration is being presented as a negative thing, as a dreadful thing, an awful thing. And many people, I'm afraid, sir, actually believe that. Now, I don't accept that for a second. You know, we've been in the European Union for 43 years, and 5% of the country came from other European countries. So 5 out of every 100 in the UK, on average, at the present moment, came from other European countries. Now, after 43 years, that doesn't strike me as the country is being overrun. That strikes me as people who are hardworking, diligent, making an enormous contribution to this country, and I am fed up in this campaign seeing them presented as a negative. It's not fair, it's not right, and it's not true.
If I may come back on that,
Boris Johnson, you can come back in a second. Okay. I want to go out to the audience. Who would agree with what Alex Salmond has just said, or what Priti Patel was saying? Who's got their hand up? How about the gentleman over there in the front row? Wait for the microphone. Here we go. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I totally agree with Alex Salmond. I think if you look at the figures, actually, there has been periods in our history of being in the EU where there have been more British people immigrating to Europe than the other way around. The British economy over the last 10 years has been pretty strong compared to the rest of Europe, which means that more Europeans are coming to Britain today.
Okay, who disagrees with Alex Salmond?
We acknowledge that.
No one, my goodness me. The questioner does. Tony, on you go. You want to come back?
The question is quite simply a practical one about resourcing and cost. Building a new reservoir, for example, and don't forget in the southeast, the water company has pressed the government not to allow further housing development because it simply cannot cope with the water provision. To build a new reservoir, for example, takes billions and takes several years. The question about resourcing unconstrained population growth is a fair question. Please don't turn it into cartoon politics about attitudes to immigrants and immigration.
So
that was not my question.
Yeah.
Don't deflect away from the answer. Do you, Mr. Salmond, have any idea at all how many immigrants per year this country can either afford or cope with? And bearing in mind, we're not talking about the leafy suburbs where the elite live.
All right.
We're talking about the Midlands and the north of England, where ordinary, decent people...
Okay, we've asked the question.
I don't live in leafy... Sir,
okay.
I didn't demean your question in any way whatsoever, but I don't live in leafy suburbs. I live in a country which has areas which suffer not from immigration, but from emigration. And I've seen emigration and depopulation, and believe me, it's a lot worse, the problems that it causes, than immigration cause. We've got a family in the Highlands at the present moment, in Dingwall, the Brain family from Australia, who were attracted to Scotland under a campaign which I launched as First Minister, the Highland Homecoming campaign. And they're about to be kicked out by the Home Secretary, despite the fact they're exactly the sort of hard-working people. You know, their son is 7 years old, Lachlan. His first language is Scots Gaelic. And they're going to be kicked back to Australia, betraying all the promises that were made to them by an immigration policy which regards people coming to your country as a problem. I'm not saying you do, sir, but many people have got that impression through this campaign.
Okay, Boris is agreeing with Alex Salmond. This is a moment.
Well, I do agree very strongly with Alec about that, because the Brain family, and I studied the story, were of course from Australia, if I remember correctly. And they are victims of the imbalance in the whole immigration policy that we have in this country as a result of our EU membership. And we at the moment cannot, if we want to have brilliant engineers from India or paramedics from Australia who are vital for our ambulance service, we face obstacles to getting them of the kind that the Brain family face, whereas we have absolutely no way of impeding if I could just finish, huge numbers of people coming from the other EU countries, and in a way that we cannot control. Now, it's control that matters. Because there's a reason why across Europe you are seeing the rise of far-right parties. There's a reason why you're seeing immigration escalated in the whole conversation at the moment. And that is, I think, because people feel that they haven't given democratic consent to what is happening. And it's because we can't do that, and because we don't have control, that you're seeing this.
Boris, you have.
We're going to have to move on, Alex. Very briefly.
That was fairer to both
sides. I wouldn't have this. Your government has control over the future of the Brain family. It's entirely under the control.
But not over anybody coming from the EU.
No, but you have control over the future of the Brain family. And the idea is that your campaign can go to Scotland and say, look, you're going to have the freedom in Scotland to have lots more immigrants, while you're campaigning in England saying keep them out at all costs. Is a nonsense in this campaign. A total nonsense, Boris, and you know it.
Sorry, you're guilty of, if I may say so, you're guilty of completely misrepresenting what I've just said.
Okay,
which
you know what?
Which is that it is unfair and imbalanced. At the moment, there is a discrimination against people from
So you think the
outside
brain
the
should
EU.
stay?
Okay,
But yes, of course.
I
but no
don't.
control.
Patel, you've
Listen,
got
as
no
important
control
as this
over
story is, I don't
people
want to
coming from
spend
the
another
EU.
10 minutes talking about the Brain family, as big a story as it is. Let's move on. We will, of course, immigration will, of course, pop up throughout the debate. Let's move on to our second question now, and it is it is from one of the biggest names on YouTube.
Hello, I'm Jamal. I'm an internet entrepreneur and ambassador for Arts Council England and an MBE. My business, SBTV, employs 7 people in the UK and exports high-quality digital entertainment around the world. The success of my business is based on a thriving digital economy. And my question is, how would remaining in or leaving the EU affect my business?
Right, Liz Kendall, how would coming out or staying in the EU affect small business? Surely by coming out, there's going to be less red tape.
Well, actually, this is if we complete the single market in digital, I think this is a hugely positive story about how we can grow and expand jobs and opportunities in this country. I have several small businesses in my constituency who are involved in computer and digital. They believe that if we stay, we reform the single market and make that work, they know they can expand and thrive. And, you know, a lot of this campaign has been quite negative on both sides. And I want to tell a positive story about what Britain can achieve for people in creating more jobs and opportunities in future.
But
and
Liz,
I think that's precisely
you can't ignore many small businesses who've said throughout this campaign that although they enjoy access to this market, they would prefer less red tape. They would prefer not paying specific charges.
Well, some people call it red tape. I call it maternity leave, paternity leave, anti-discrimination laws, protection for our water, air and environment. I think that makes Britain fairer and stronger, and I'm proud that we're part of a European Union that protects those rights at work.
Priti Patel.
Well, I think first of all, let's be clear when it comes to, if we want to use the term red tape, regulations as well, I would use very specifically. 5% of our businesses actually trade with the European Union, and yet 100% of them are subject to a raft of regulations and rules. And let's be clear, Liz has mentioned workers' rights, employment rights, maternity rights. These are rights that are set in statute by the British Parliament. We don't need the European Union.
You said
at
you want
all
to halve employment law, Priti.
I haven't.
Which
Well,
of the 50% of
Liz,
the
tell
laws
me when I've said that, because I have not.
You said it a couple of months ago. Boris wants to scrap the social chapter. You know, Ian
Liz,
Duncan
if you let me
Smith has
finish.
complained about the working time directive. Which of the employment laws do you want to scrap?
None. And I've never said that we'd scrap any employment
You
laws.
said you wanted to halve employment law.
What I've spoken about is the fact that small businesses and large businesses, we don't even know as a government the extent of the regulation that affects businesses because of the transportation of directives that come over. We need to actually have smarter and sensible regulation and also know
We're
which
already
rules-
one of the least
which
regulated
rules-
countries in the G7.
We need to know which rules are impacting and affecting British businesses so that we can actually help them to trade and grow and prosper, not just within Europe as well, but actually outside of the European Union. I think that's incredibly important to recognise that small businesses in my constituency and many other constituencies around the country, they want the freedom to succeed. They don't want to be burdened by excessive regulation that more often than not includes procurement rules, form filling that actually adds no value to their businesses.
Okay, briefly, Liz Kendall.
You have said that you wanted to halve the amount of employment laws.
I
You've
have
never
not.
spelt out
I
what
have
they are.
not.
Boris wants to be out of the social chapter. People like Ian Duncan
is a
Smith
complete
opposed the social
misrepresentation.
chapter, the working time directive, and voted against the minimum wage. I am taking you at your word. I don't think it's red tape and regulation.
just
I
said
think
very
it's
clearly
basic
Okay.
rights that
and I've not said that.
underpin the working
Okay,
There are
okay.
plenty of rules and regulations that make it much more difficult to do business in the European Union that are nothing to do with protecting workers' rights. And we want to protect them. If you look at the EU as a whole, it is a zone of the lowest growth anywhere in the world apart from Antarctica. They've got catastrophic youth unemployment in many parts of the Mediterranean countries, running at 50%, 51% in Greece. The whole EU project is a machine for generating excessive bureaucracy and red tape. And on the digital point, which our question was about, actually the amazing thing about this city is how, and the UK economy, is how well we do in the whole digital sector in spite of EU
do even
legislation
better.
Okay,
and
do
regulation.
even better.
Okay,
And
Alexander,
I
please.
believe
And
that
then
we
we're
have the
going to move
opportunity
on,
to do
please.
better still outside.
Okay, Alexander.
Well, just 2 points. One, the Brexiteers say, look, there's only so many companies, often big companies, export. I don't think that's right, incidentally. And the digital economy is an example of where lots of small companies. So why should other companies have to pay the price or to be observe these regulations when only so many export? Because it misses the point. If you take a great English industry, it is, because we don't have it in Scotland, the car industry, the revival of the car industry in the north of England. Each of these great car plants has literally hundreds of suppliers who depend on their ability to export. And one last point, Boris.
Okay, briefly.
When Liz was talking about you wanting to scrap the social chapter, you were shaking your head. But you said it to Reuters in 2012. And you have to see, you know, unlike other people, I think
hang on, if you all talk at once, then no one can hear.
It's a perfectly honourable position for you to want to become Prime Minister. I think that's all politicians want that sort of thing. But my worry is not that you wanting to be Prime Minister, it's what you would do when you were Prime Minister. And scrapping the social chapter doesn't give us control. It might give you control, but that's a protection that most workers in this country would like to keep.
Okay, okay. I will want to hear from some audience members just with the next question. We're going to stay with the economy, and the question comes from Steve Hubble. Steve.
Good evening. Why is the Leave campaign trying to undo the economic stability we have built up since the economic crash? What effect would leaving have on us and the economy?
Priti Patel, let me start with you. I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice. £30 billion lost today because of fears over Brexit. Is that a risk worth taking?
Well, you're speaking specifically about financial markets, and let's be clear that when it comes to markets in particular, they knew the referendum was coming. They factor in, you know, these events, whether it's general elections, political events and things of that nature. But I think it's important to also reflect global factors in the marketplace as well. You know, the Governor of the Bank of England, he has also said that when you look at the issues like China and what's going on in the economy there, obviously that plays out in terms of the wider global market. Now, specifically to the question of the economy and the purported risk that the Remain side are saying that would happen if we were to vote to leave the European Union, I'm optimistic, actually, about the future of our economy in the long term, because we would have the freedom to trade, the freedom to grow our economy in a way in which we are currently prevented from doing so. Europe and the European economy is in the slow lane. Let's be very clear about that. Economic growth in Europe is not particularly high, it's not very strong. Look at the levels of unemployment across Europe and the Eurozone as well. So there is a huge opportunity for us to, yes, break free from that, but also form new partnerships, new relationships, in a way in which we can grow our economy by trading externally with some of the fastest growing economies in the world, but also some of the economies with the largest working age populations as well.
Priti, thank you.
And that would lead to more inward investment and more economic growth.
On the Remain side, Alex Salmond, what would happen if we were to the economy if we were to leave the EU?
Well, I was just going to point out to Priti that in the first quarter this year, Europe actually outgrew the UK economy. So I mean, just as a matter of fact in terms of GDP, but you know, I for understandable reasons, people here will understand why I don't really go along with the economic Armageddon stuff. I don't like the scaremongering stuff.
Well said,
and I've got very good reason. I've got very good reason for saying that.
But this is nonetheless, because Alex Salmond, you were on the other side of that debate.
Because I've seen it from the other side, and I don't think it's the way to campaign. But undoubtedly, there would be an economic hit. And that economic hit, I think, would be concentrated on inward investment, because a lot of inward investment is looking for guaranteed access to the 500 million market across the EU. Now, the Leave side could minimise that hit if they would commit to the European Economic Area like Norway or EFTA like Switzerland. But of course, they won't do that, because along with the EEA or EFTA comes with free movement of people. And given perhaps not Priti and Boris, but the rest of the campaign, or Nigel and the other lot who are not here tonight, are featuring on immigration, and they won't commit to something, even if it diminished the economic damage, because it would involve free movement people. And that is the contradiction at the heart of the Brexit campaign.
Quick point about the Remain.
And then I want to come to the audience.
Just quickly on the Remain campaign. The Remain campaign are themselves now riven with indecision and division about this. I think it was Tom Watson of your party today and Ed Balls, Ed Balls, both of whom have said that they think that we need to go back on the negotiation and have changes to the rules on freedom. Am I not right in saying that? I think Remain is all over the place on that issue. They're conceding, I think, one of the fundamental points. And on the question that the gentleman asked, which is, is there going to be an economic shock? I think the best advice I can give is to relay what the Prime Minister himself said a few months ago, before the whole logic of Project Fear kicked in, and I agree totally with Alec that it's ludicrous, some of the things that we're hearing at the moment. The Prime Minister said that there was no doubt at all that Britain could thrive mightily outside the EU. You'd hear all sorts of scaremongering, and we could do free trade deals. I am very confused by what I'm hearing from Anthony Bamford of JCB. Alec talks about car sales. Here is a guy, JCB, make diggers that are literally building Britain, building the whole world. They're huge bits of kit that we are selling in ever-growing quantities. You might have thought that the single market was designed for people like JCB.
Okay.
On the contrary, he wants out for the very reason that there's too much regulation, too much red tape. He's better selling into it than being out of it.
Okay, let's go back to Steve, who asked the question about, is it worth this economic stability of the UK being put at risk? Is that how you feel?
Yeah. I've just bought a house with my girlfriend, first house, and we've gone through a very tough time, haven't we, as an economy? Why would we put that at risk and run the risk of a housing crash again, of putting ourselves against a devaluation of the pound, all of these things? Sometimes mundanity is good, sometimes stability is good. Why do you feel the need that you need to change something that's
okay?
Not
Who else feels that fear? The lady right up at the back, please, just there, yeah.
How are we supposed to trust you, Boris Johnson, when you wrote a book a few years ago talking about how the single market is undeniably a great thing, and now you're on stage saying something else completely different? I don't think you're a trustworthy individual at all, and you're just in it for your own gain. I'm afraid I don't believe anything you've got to say on this issue.
Oh, okay.
I think it's important in this debate not to get dragged into, not to get dragged to the whole past.
You've been asked this many times before. You've changed your mind.
If I may say so, I think the single market is a fascinating study. But just get to your point, because what happens there is that the predictions for growth within the single market post 1992, when the thing started, have turned out to be completely false. There are, I think, about 36 countries outside the EU that have done better than this country at exporting both goods and services into the single market. And that tells me that is the ideal, and they include America, Japan, China, India, all the growth economies of the world. They're doing much better at exporting into the single market.
I want to come back, Boris. I want to come back to Steve's point here. I mean, some people on the Leave campaign are a bit more honest, and they say our economy will take a hit, jobs will be lost, and they say it's a price worth paying for what they believe is an illusion. Or Dominic Cummings, Aaron Banks, Michael Gove said that jobs may be lost.
He said that Euro MPs might lose.
Boris,
okay.
He said 73
now I want to come back about this.
Okay,
who is it?
Michael Gove said 73 British Euro MPs might lose their jobs.
Boris, excuse me, but who will pay the price?
And I don't think I
It won't be Boris or Priti or me or Alec.
Okay.
It will be the people who always pay the
No, we're going to move on.
price.
Listen, immigration and the economy is going to continue throughout this debate. There's lots of questions about it, so hold your fire, everyone. Alex, please, we have to move on. We will come back to you. Now, the Brexit debate is very much being fought out online, and Google Trends has been analysing search data to show which issues people are most concerned about, and it's very interesting. Looking at the 5 big issues: the economy and immigration, which we've already been discussing, the NHS, sovereignty and national security, we can see which has been the most searched issue since the referendum date was announced. And as you can see, immigration and the economy have dominated the campaign, with the NHS in third place and sovereignty and national security interchanging at the bottom. Now, there is a brief surge in interest in national security in mid-March, but immigration and the economy remained the big search topics. By the way, in May, things did change. Sharp increase in NHS-related searches sees health briefly taking the lead, then dropping back slightly, although remaining higher than the economy. Who here in the audience doesn't see immigration and the economy as the most important thing in this debate? Anyone at all? What about this gentleman in the second row, the white shirt with his hand up, just here? Which issues are most important for you?
Opportunities for young people. I don't think it comes in the case of economy, because economics is not opportunities. I feel someone like myself to vote in, which I'm going to do, I feel that it's going to give me the basis of why would I change something that I've been born into. It gives me opportunities to do things that I feel I wouldn't be able to do if I leave. If I leave, I have to follow a different course. The different course is going to be something that's not sustainable. I just want to say one thing as well, talking about opportunity. When you said, Priti, the fellow asked you a question and you said, well, I believe. Your belief isn't good enough. When you're telling us to leave and take a chance on something, I need something a bit more concrete, I fully understand what you're saying, but I say, when Leave MPs are talking or people that are spitting stuff for rhetoric for Leave, it's always I think and maybe and what I would do. But when we talk about remaining, it's what we do and this is what we have done. And I can see results in that as a young person. I feel for young people like myself, it's about opportunity and what would why would we change what we're doing now and change the course? It could change opportunity for us and growth as young people.
Well, can I give one?
Well, hang on a minute. It was directed to Priti, very briefly.
Yes, let me just come back to that, because, of course, when it comes to opportunity, there are many opportunities in the global world, and that is the point about this debate. We are saying, and rightly so, there will be huge opportunities when it comes to employment, when it comes to jobs, inward investment, new opportunities and experiences. Yes, if we vote to leave on June the 23rd, because we'll be able to engage with the rest of the world in a way in which we've simply not been able to do so because of our membership of the European Union. And just to point on jobs as well, yes, I said I believe, because I do believe that we would be stronger, more prosperous and have a brighter future outside of the European Union, because I listen to the voice of business. I listen to the business leaders that are creating jobs and wealth and prosperity in this country, and they want to do more. They want to believe in Britain, and they want to see Britain stand stronger.
Okay, is there anyone in this audience who believes in the same thing as Priti Patel? Please put your hand up. There must be somebody. Right, this gentleman over here, please.
I came from the Commonwealth.
Hang on. Right, go.
Yeah, I came from India, Commonwealth, as an immigrant. I'm settled as a British citizen now. I and my wife. We worked very hard. We contributed to the British economy. I was working for the largest cancer charity in the UK. I've contributed a lot to the British economy in terms of my taxes, my volunteering work. I've engaged with my local communities. And to be honest, this pro and anti-immigration, this debate will never end. But what I feel is, there are plenty of other issues which we can resolve by coming out of the EU.
Like what?
Like national security, nobody talks about it.
So we're going to go on to that, don't worry.
Right. Yeah, but it's not the topmost two search-related issues,
This is true.
And as we speak, there's a live hostage situation in Texas at the moment. So things are quite unstable in terms of security. We've had a lot of people coming in through the Mediterranean, courtesy Angela Merkel's controversial decision, which many don't agree with. And some way or the other, many people might be coming to the British shores, right? So national security is one of the issues.
Okay.
And leaving the EU. And again, coming to the Priti's point, we have to expand beyond EU. Commonwealth, emerging markets is our priority.
Okay.
And we are just stuck with the EU. So voting to leave will help us broaden our horizons.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that point of view. Very refreshing. Now, during tonight's debate, we'll be throwing in questions from expert journalists here in the audience. And first up is Peter Dominiczak, political editor of The Telegraph. Peter.
Does the tone of this campaign, particularly the use of Project Fear tactics and the dominance of personal attacks in recent days, show that Britain's political classes have lost touch with the hopes and fears of ordinary British voters?
Right. Well, I mean, you are looking very much at Priti and Boris. Boris?
Well,
Have you lost touch with ordinary voters?
I think that some of the language that's being used to scare people about the consequences of voting leave, I do think is extreme, and I'm very much at one with what Alec has been, and I think Nicola Sturgeon as well, has been saying about that, because it's totally different from what Stuart Rose said previously. Remember, he's actually the head of the Remain campaign, and a few months ago he was questioned by the Treasury Select Committee, to get back to your point, sir, about what would happen post Britain leaving. And he said there wouldn't be any kind of economic shock at all. There would be one economic result, which was that people on low incomes would see their wages rise. And that strikes me as being a very, very important consequence of voting to leave. It is probably true. It's what the Bank of England has confirmed, that when you have large movements of labour across the EU, as we're seeing, you will have a compressing effect on wages. I thought that was very significant. It's very important.
Can you say the bank? Sorry, Boris.
In the last few days,
who in the Bank of England said that? Sorry.
Like that.
Okay,
who in the Bank of England said what you've just said?
It was a Bank of England study that showed that for every
who wrote it?
10% increase in immigration, there was a 2% reduction in wages.
No, it didn't. Have you read that study, Boris? You see, have you actually read it? That's a straight question. Have you read that study?
I've not read that study, but
right.
I've
very honest.
I've not read that. But
Asma, can we just nail this? Because I've heard this from a number of leaders. So I've taken the trouble of reading the study. It was from Stephen, Nico, and Jumani Santini. It doesn't say. It says a 10% rise in immigration would result in 1/3 of 1 pence diminution in average wages. 1/3 of 1 pence. It would result in, of EU immigration, because that's all immigration, EU immigration for one sector of the economy, that is sort of the workforce. No, Boris, let me finish this point, because after all, I went to the trouble of reading the study, which you're citing.
And I think you're confirming exactly what I've said.
No, 1/3 of 1 pence is not 2%, Boris. That's 2 pence. You see, that's 6 times. And see, when you come along here, and you complain and say, I agree with Alec about not scaremongering, and then you go on to scaremonger on wages.
No, I think most people know that wages in this country have not... You're not saying wages have gone up.
No, I'm saying
wages have gone up.
I'm saying the way to protect wages in this country is to believe in the minimum and living wage, which you don't, and I do.
On the contrary, in this very...
Hang on a sec, hang on.
In this very room, if I may say so, in this very room...
because we're getting away from the question.
In this very room, we launched the latest version of the London Living Wage, and under my mayoralty, we increased it by 800%.
You didn't want it in 2004.
Number of firms that paid it, and it was a colossal success. I won't have that for you. I think
2004, Boris. You didn't want the minimum wage then.
What you've confirmed, Alec, today and just now, is that there is a compressing effect on wages as a result of immigration.
But you multiplied it by a factor.
I have to say, this is fascinating, but...
That needs to be borne in mind. And most people...
No, hang on a minute. This is not answering the question, which is very important. Have politicians lost touch with ordinary voters? Who thinks they have? Who thinks they haven't? The gentleman over there with the grey shirt who's got his hand up, right there. There's a red microphone coming to you. Right.
Hi, I'd just like to start off by just requesting that the panel speak to the audience rather than each other, because I think that's probably the first sign of maybe actually connecting with the people who are voting.
So you just answered the question,
I have answered the question.
Yeah.
I think all of the debates, including this one, are a real good example of politicians just talking to each other. It's not about your egos, it's actually about our lives. That's what you're actually talking about right now. What I wanted to move back to really was a point around that everyone talks about the economy and makes these kind of large they make these large they come up with all these dreams almost. And it's, if we left, and this is for both sides, if we left, how could we really guarantee that we'd get the best deal for Britain? How can we guarantee that we wouldn't be worse off? We've been in a situation where David Cameron hasn't been able to negotiate all of the things that he wanted to negotiate. So if we leave, how can we guarantee that would get any better?
Okay.
How can we guarantee that if we left,
that is an excellent question,
that wouldn't become worse? We wouldn't
okay.
have any say in what was happening in the EU. But
okay, that is an excellent question, and I know that we are going to move on to that, so hold fire. And I promise you
Cool.
Look me in the eye. I
I'm
promise
looking at
you that we are going to go back to that. I don't want you to think that I'm soft-soaping you. Does anyone here think that, no, actually the politicians haven't lost touch with the ordinary voters? They're speaking to us. They are addressing our concerns, which seem to be immigration and the economy, according to Google Trends. Anyone at all? The same man again. One lonely positive voice. Anyone else? That's a pretty damning indictment. Boris Johnson.
Try and reply to the
question,
which is, I mean, it has been a horrible debate, and it's not been very enlightening for a lot of people. And after June the 23rd, we need to work, I think, to bring our communities together. And whatever happens, and I obviously hope that we remain, there are many parts of this country, many towns that feel left out and left behind. And that has been happening from even way before the crash. And we are going to have to work seriously to make sure those areas get decent jobs and public services with a modern industrial strategy. We need to think about why we are here, who we are meant to serve, and understand that whether we leave or remain, and I desperately hope we remain because I think our job will be harder, we have to wake up to that real feeling of disconnection in many parts of the country.
Okay, Alex, very briefly.
The question was, have politicians lost touch with the hopes and fears? Well, they certainly haven't lost touch with the fears, because both sides are busy scaremongering on the economy on one side, on immigration on the other. It's the hopes they've lost. And just as I want to hear the positive case for immigration, I want to hear the positive case for Europe. I think there's an extraordinary positive case about peace and prosperity that the European Union has contributed to. And we've hardly heard that in this campaign.
Well, hang
in
on
the
a
last
minute.
week of the campaign,
Alex, why haven't we heard it? That's the fault of the Remain campaign.
Well, I think, as I say, I think both sides have been engaged in scaremongering and negative tactics and the rest of it. I think
it is up to the Remain side to shout louder.
Let me cheer you up, Alex. Let me cheer you up and move you away from all the gloom-mongering that's going on from
Okay, we do need to move on. This is the last word on this.
Very, 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 very quickly, because there is a huge opportunity for this country. We are locked into a system that doesn't really suit our interests. We could be doing much more to trade with the 93% of the world that isn't in the EU. At the moment, all our trade policy is controlled by the EU Commission. Only 3.6% of EU Commission officials actually come from this country. We cannot do free trade deals with America, with China, with India that would take forward, that would allow our economy to grow. If I can just finish this point, just let me finish this point. Allow our economy to grow, according to the EU Commission's own figures, by 284,000 jobs. Now, that's a fantastic prize. What about that? What about that? What about taking back control of our trade policy and believing in ourselves as a great trading nation, and not thinking that we can't do it on our own? Because that's the truth about this country. And the difference between our side of the argument and their side of the argument is very, very simple. We believe that we can do it. We believe there are a great country.
Okay, you've made your point. You've made your point. This is not an opportunity for you to give a speech, Boris. I'm sorry. As wonderful as it was, it's not an opportunity. No, I will come to you in a minute. I want to move on, but I've seen you and I will come to you. Let's just have a look about how this issue about politicians shows up on our Google search data. We've been looking at how leading figures, the personalities, have featured in searches since February. So is it Cameron, Farage, Boris Johnson, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, or Michael Gove, who is #1 for searches? And if you have a look, you can see it is a two-horse race between Boris Johnson and David Cameron, continually swapping places at the top. Jeremy Corbyn makes a move towards the end of March and into April when he pushes Boris into third place. Sorry, Boris. And there is a spike for Michael Gove later in April and again in May. But the biggest boost came for Nigel Farage, who sat at #3 until he appeared in the TV debates with David Cameron. The result, a spike in searches for the UKIP leader all the way to #1. Right, on that subject, Boris, I want to come to you just very, very quickly on that, because Nigel Farage, that was after a TV debate, and he became the most searched for person. You took part in a debate where there were, how many other women? There were 5 other women, and it didn't have an impact. Why not? You should have been #1, should you not? You should have been mirroring what Nigel Farage.
With greatest respect to you, I think this question is exactly what I think many people in the audience have been complaining about. What we want to hear is discussion of the issues. We don't want to hear some ludicrous assessment of.
But that's what people are searching for.
which politicians
Boris,
have been Googled. What they want to know is...
But Boris, that's what people are searching for.
If I may say so, what people want to know is what's going to happen to the UK after we leave the EU, the fantastic opportunities that I think this country has to build a brighter future, to take back control of very considerable sums of money, which you haven't mentioned already, and basically the fundamental issue for me is democracy. It's taking back control of our ability to govern ourselves. And at the moment, you've got 60% of the law that goes through the Palace of Westminster emanating, whether primary legislation or secondary legislation, from the EU. I think the most important, there is a fundamental dishonesty now.
Okay.
A dishonesty, to get to your point, about what is being proposed. We were told that in 1972 that this was a common market. It's now turning into a United States of Europe.
Boris.
And it's no longer suitable, I think.
Okay.
I don't know.
Let's move on to the next question. Alex, I will come back to you. Let's move on to our next question, which is another one from the journalist here tonight. It's Paul Waugh, who is Executive Editor of Politics at the Huffington Post UK. Paul.
If the result is a narrow one on June 23rd, 24th, is that a genuine mandate for either side? Or do you rule out a second referendum at some point in the future, or is a win a win?
Priti Patel.
Well, I'm very clear that this referendum is a once-in-a-generational opportunity, basically, to vote on our relationship with the European Union. So this result, in my view, is one that should be accepted, whatever the outcome. And of course, we move on at that stage in terms of the British public will have their say. And I think this is, an important point to make. This vote, this referendum will be decided by, the viewers, the people in the room, but importantly by the British public. It is their vote on June the 23rd that counts. It's their vote that will make a difference. And of course, it's their opportunity to take back control, bring powers back, repatriate powers to the British
Okay, you've
public.
answered the question. It's a once-in-a-generation thing. Liz Kendall, I'd like to hear from you just very briefly. If it's a narrow result, what next?
A win is a win. This is it, and people need to understand that. And let me just say this on Britain's power and influence in the world. Most of the challenges we face are global in nature. We get more influence and power of being part of the EU. It is true that we have economies rising in Asia and the South. I believe as being part of a bigger, stronger bloc of European countries, we will get a better deal for Britain. This illusion of greater control, nations that wield influence most effectively do it through the collective action that today's challenges require. President Obama said that. He's right.
Okay. Look at some of the problems across Europe.
No, we're going to move on. And Alex, this will be an opportunity for you, and you can come back on that. Next question is from Kira Giuliani. Kira.
Hi, this question's actually for Mr. Salmond. If a yes or no would be quite nice, if that's possible. I know sometimes that's hard. If Brexit goes ahead, will it trigger another Scottish independence referendum?
If Scotland has voted Remain, then I believe it would, yes.
What sort of mandate?
Well, actually, it wasn't because I knew you were going to ask me the question, but Priti kindly told the Daily Telegraph she was going to ask me the question. So I took the precaution of bringing along the SNP manifesto from last month's Scottish election. And it's a very short paragraph. Can I read it to you? We believe that the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the European Union against our will. Now, on that manifesto, the SNP won 47% of the vote. That's the mandate. That's why my answer to your question is yes.
Okay, but let's just play devil's advocate for a second. Just because there would be an independence referendum does not necessarily mean that there would be a yes vote.
Of course not. I mean, as we're finding out in this referendum, and David Cameron in particular is finding out that the best laid schemes of mice prime ministers and referendum gang after Galay. You can't forecast.
Oh, that's an interesting admission from the
yes. Well, yes,
hang on.
Absolutely.
I will come to you.
You don't know the result of a referendum in advance, but what we do know is that the SNP stood on that manifesto, which I've just read out to you, in last month's election and got 47% of the vote in Scotland. Now, this referendum we're having this now was held by David Cameron on a mandate of 37% of the vote. So it'd have to go through the Scottish Parliament, there would have to be a Remain vote in Scotland, accompanying a Brexit elsewhere, but under these circumstances, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
I think that Alec needs to have a word with the First Minister of Scotland. I don't know what his authority is over Nicola Sturgeon.
None.
Because she was very interesting.
As much as your authority over David Cameron, I would imagine.
Well, she was very interesting on that.
Okay. What's the point you would like to make?
She was very interesting on that point the other night because everybody knows that there was a very conclusive referendum result a couple of years ago. The Scots voted to stay in the United Kingdom, and I think that matter has been settled for a generation. And Nicola was given the opportunity really repeatedly to say what Alec has just said, and she refused. And I think that's because she recognises there's no appetite in Scotland whatsoever for a new referendum. People have voted on it. And to get back to Priti's point,
and you're an expert in these things for us.
I think people find being asked to decide these big constitutional questions, it's a huge responsibility for people. Politicians are paid to take important decisions. They should not regularly remit fundamental questions to people in this way. I think that's why both the European Union question and the Scottish question should be generational questions.
Okay, people in the audience. We haven't heard from people in the audience in a while. From
Scotland as part of a strong United Kingdom,
Kendall,
United Kingdom as part of the EU. That is worth bearing in mind.
Okay, let's hear from someone from the audience, please. This gentleman here in the second row with his hand up. Yes, what would you like to say?
A question on defence, please, and back to your point about us being part of a bigger, more powerful bloc. If we were to leave, it may lead to the destabilisation of the entire European project. Now, with Russia influencing more and more as we go along, and then probing our defences as they do with their subs and their planes more regularly now, and with America potentially saying we're going to backtrack from being a global police, how does that leave us as a sole nation fighting on a much more global scale?
Okay, no, hang on one sec. I just want to get a couple of questions in, then we can come back. The lady there with a hand up, with a grey jacket on.
Hiya, I'm a student. I'm currently paying £9,000. My question is to the Out campaign. Basically, I just want to know, what would you kind of tell students in a nutshell why we should actually leave? Bearing in mind that most of the promises that you have made to students have actually just been decimated and you actually haven't followed them through. So it'd be really nice if you could actually kind of say something to students to actually let them know why we should leave rather than stay in. Thank you.
Priti Patel, I know you've been talking about universities this morning. What would you like to say?
Completely. No, well, I'm very positive in terms of the future for students if we were to vote to leave, on the basis that not just would we secure and safeguard university funding, but importantly, there is a significant point about this in terms of our governance, having a Parliament, sovereignty, basically decisions being made in your interest in Westminster.
But Priti, can you clarify, because it's still a bit unclear about this money that you say that if we came out we wouldn't lose all that money that's going to universities, we would still be able to find it. Where would you find it?
Well, of course, we currently send money to Brussels. Effectively, there are no controls over that money. So if we were to vote to leave, we'd have that money back in this country to spend on priorities such as universities, on research development and on farming as well. We've been clear about that.
Magic money tree.
But
hang on.
Actually, Liz, come on, it's not. On the basis as
You're
well,
welcome to be the party who believes in the magic money tree.
We would have more money to spend because, of course, we'd do away with the bureaucratic administration that is associated with the administration of that money when it does come back to us from Brussels.
Okay, can we go back to the questioner? Does that help you at all?
That's a great opportunity for them.
Hang on.
No, it hasn't really ever kind of helped. And I think it's really unfair for you to sit there and just not really understand or sympathise with what students are currently going through in regards to how much we are actually leaving in regards to university in debt, and why we're not going to take your promises seriously in regards to the better future that you keep on talking about, because it's very hard to do so when you are in so much debt and coming out of this. But thank you for your response, even though I didn't really get it, but thank you.
Okay, now, who else wants to make a point? Anyone else want to contribute here? Anyone who hasn't spoken yet? No, Boris, not you. Right, how about the man in the front row over here, please? The pink shirt. Yeah, here we go.
Boris, we hear you talk quite often about how the EU is anti-democratic. Could you just elucidate a little on exactly why it is anti-democratic, and then perhaps the other side could say why they want to vote to be part of something that is anti-democratic?
Yes. I think the EU is hopelessly anti-democratic. I mean, how many people can name their Euro MP who is supposed to be the person who represents them in the EU institutions? Nobody knows what goes on in the EU Commission. I bet that hardly anybody here can name the 5 presidents of the major EU institutions who are dictating the future of the EU after the referendum, and who have plans to build an even more tightly integrated federal Europe. I think it's a disaster, a democratic disaster, that quite so many decisions are now taken a long way away from the scrutiny of the British people. And we cannot sack them at elections. People, when I was Mayor of London, people roughly speaking knew who I was. When I cycled around the streets, they knew, and they would shout at me all sorts of abuse, as some of you have kindly done tonight. And quite rightly, they knew that I was responsible for things. We do not know who's in charge of huge quantities of regulation and legislation. We cannot remove them. And it is not as if they are doing a good job. There is huge unemployment in the EU. It is an economic disaster area, and it needs reform, and it needs us in this country to speak up for it.
One more question, and it is the man with the beard and the yellow tie. Yes.
Hello. Yes. Question for Alex Salmond. If I'm Scottish and I don't like the policy of the Scottish government, or I'm merely missing you as First Minister, I can vote for...
Talking, you're doing well.
Thank you. I could vote for Ruth Davidson's Conservatives in Scotland. If I'm Scottish and I don't like what David Cameron is doing with the country, I could vote for the Labour Party or the SNP. If I'm Scottish and I don't like an EU policy, who do I vote against?
Well, can I say that the key decision-making body is the Council of Ministers, who are the elected heads of government of 28 countries. And Boris talks about these 5 presidents. Well, if we take the Jean-Claude Juncker, who's the president of the European Commission, or for that matter, Donald Tusk, who's the president of the Euro Council, these are effectively the cabinet secretaries of these decision-making bodies, in the case of the European Council, which is elected heads of government of 28 countries. Now, I've got an idea about this unelected stuff. Why don't we take the 800 members of the House of Lords and send them across to Brussels and give them an instruction in democratic accountability?
Okay.
Can I make a point?
There's a lot of people that want to come in, but I want us to move on.
Are we actually allowed to answer the questions? It's, politicians are criticised for not responding to people, and we're not getting a chance.
No, politicians are criticised for answering the questions that they want to answer, not necessarily the ones they don't want to.
I think I answered the question fairly directly.
Do you? Okay.
Can I answer on students? Being part of the EU means students at my 2 brilliant universities, Leicester Uni and De Montfort University, can study, learn, travel, work in other countries. But people are very worried about getting jobs when they leave, especially when they have debt. And they don't want our economy to be put at risk. And they also know that our universities get incredible funding for top quality, world-leading research. And quite frankly, the Leave campaign have spent all that money time and time again. And on the issue of national security, there is one person who wouldn't be happier if we vote to leave on the 23rd, and that is Vladimir Putin. He wants to see a weakened Britain and a weakened EU, and I don't want to play into his hands.
Okay, we're going to move on now. Our next question, it comes from Louise Pentland, whose Sprinkle of Glitter blog has 2.5 million followers on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Louise Pentland. I'm the creator of Sprinkle of Glitter. I'm a single mum, and I'm also a United Nations Change Ambassador for Global Equality. My question is, when countries work together, we can have a positive impact on things like the environment. How would we improve air quality, protect our waters, clean our beaches, and cut down on pollution if we were working on our own?
Right. The environment. If all the regulations disappeared, the directives, etc., if we were to come out, Priti Patel, how would we keep the standards?
Well, of course, it's not about getting rid of all the regulations. We have very good standards here in the United Kingdom. And this is the point. We can stand alone with the regulations that we currently have, the very clear environmental standards that we have, and, share those globally and sort of set the benchmark in the right way and standards that we can share internationally. And there is no reason why we could not continue to do that and actually grow, continue to work in partnership, cooperate with other international countries, countries as well.
Okay.
And there's some good examples in the world where we're already working in collaboration outside of the European Union with countries like India when it comes to cleaning up their rivers, helping and enhancing air quality,
Alexander.
supported by British firms that want to go over there
I can
as
give
well. And
maybe a wee
work
bit
in
of practical
partnership with
experience in this. When I was First Minister of Scotland, we passed the world's leading climate change legislation in terms of the ambition to cut CO2 emissions. But Scotland's 5.25 million people. Us passing that legislation, even by emulation and saying, look what we've done, is going to have little effect. But the European Union, in terms of taking forward that, is the most progressive course at the Paris climate change talks, actually brought some of that into a worldwide agreement. Now, why would we, in terms of the environment, opt out of something which has made such a positive contribution in comparison with the other great blocs around the world? That's not taking control. That's losing control. That's losing influence. And that, I believe, is the answer to Louise's question.
Yes, Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much. I do think there's a very important failing in the way the EU works. And you saw it in the VW scandal. And we've been struggling to improve air quality in cities around the UK. We've got thousands of people die prematurely as a result of NOx and diesel particulates. Everybody was persuaded on the basis of the EU Commission's urgings to buy diesel cars. And it turned out that there was a huge scam. And VW and other manufacturers had basically been lobbying the Commission to get a certain type of testing approved, and the whole thing was a fix and a stitch-up. If we'd been doing the testing in this country, rather than relying on the homologation procedures of the EU, I think there's a real chance that that would not have happened. Millions of people in this country would not have bought machines that were very expensive and were very, very polluting. And that's a classic example of how the EU works against the interests, not just of the consumer, but against the interests of the environment. And I want to get back to what Priti said, because I agreed passionately with what she said. We actually play a bigger role sometimes if we speak as Britain. And let me give you an example. The EU is constantly trying, because the ideology is that it's 28 countries are becoming one country. What they want to do is, in international bodies, to replace the UK and speak up for us. So, in the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, about which many people in this country care absolutely passionately, the EU takes our seat. But if the EU cannot come up with an answer, if the EU doesn't have a common position on tiger skins or whaling or whatever it is, then the EU is silent. And the kicker is, Britain has no voice at all. And that is a disgrace.
Okay.
We are a great
Kendall,
country.
it's a
We should be
disgrace.
speaking up on environmental
Kendall.
questions.
Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, the RSPB, the World Wildlife Fund, they all back us remaining in the EU. We've ended up with cleaner beaches, cleaner air, less pollution. We've got beautiful areas. I mean, actually, George Eustace on your side says he wants to scrap the Birds and Habitats Directive, which has protected, hundreds of birds and beautiful areas in the country. This has been a huge improvement in the quality of life, and I am very proud that Britain has helped lead a stronger case for climate change within the EU, and the EU has then helped lead stronger change.
Okay. When Boris Johnson was making
borderless, we have to work with Europe.
Liz, thank you. When Boris Johnson was making that point there, a lot of you were clapping. Who clapped? Put your hand up. What would you like to say? Is there anyone? The gentleman at the back, please. We'll just wait for here comes the microphone. There you go. It's on your right. Okay.
I think blue flag legislation predates the EU directives.
Of course,
exactly.
I think it's organised through Denmark, and before Denmark were even involved in the EU. So it's not always the fact that the EU tries to protect environments. And dare I say, some of the climate change policies of the EU are actually very anti-competitive and actually are really destroying EU economies.
But you would agree that in the Paris talks, the European Union played a very positive role in getting world agreement.
Yes,
and that was a step
all
forward.
those protocols are never implemented, even by big blocs or by other blocs.
Well, it's good. Most people would argue that the Paris talks achieved a degree of progress. No, listen, I thought Boris said some very interesting things about the failure of EU regulation. I'm glad he's abandoned the banana example, and now we're getting into
how many directives
more
has he passed on bananas, Alec?
Well,
how many
don't
have they got?
Don't go
Are they
to
all
the bananas.
Are they all essential?
Boris,
for
the bananas are not your strongest suit in this campaign.
They're obviously your strong. May I ask you respectfully, how many directives are there on bananas?
The banana issue is
do you have to know? Have you looked at the banana directive?
Well,
have you gotten that?
No, but
how many are there?
But I know there's not. I know Boris. I know there's not.
Unlike you.
I know.
Okay, Boris.
I know there's not a restriction on bunches of bananas, and I did look at the Bank of England paper on wages and the impact of immigration.
Not to come into these debates so woefully unprepared.
Okay, guys, enough.
The reality is that
enough bananas. This is a serious debate.
Not bananas for wages.
You may not in this country.
Look, can I just say that I concede banana
Boris, that's enough bananas, please.
You may not sell bananas with abnormal curvature of the fingers. Because Brussels says so. Now, I don't think, and I don't know what Priti... I think
we should leave the European Union and a single market of 500 million people on the banana diet.
Okay, there is no point. We do not want to be remembered tonight for shouting about bananas, so can we all just calm down? Please, gentlemen in the front row, if we can get a microphone to you, hopefully we can. Just this man here in the front. Here we go, it's coming to you now. Right, what would you like to say?
Thank you. Boris, you spoke about the faceless bureaucrats in Europe, and then Liz spoke about the Habitats and Birds Directive. Well, the man that introduced that in Europe was one Stanley Johnson, which you may know better as your father. Now, I work for Stanley. I run Environmentalists for Europe, and he does a lot of great work and achieved huge amounts in Europe. Now, you can't build walls against air pollution, water pollution and climate change. Half of the air pollution that we have in this city comes from Europe. So how do you solve that by leaving the union that allows us to tackle it together?
Because I think what my father would say, and I agree, that when he began his work in the 1970s, it was a very different EU. And there was a huge amount to be achieved, and I pay tribute to what he did. I think he would also say, though, that it has become a very different proposition. And it's now moving into as I say, United States of Europe, in which so many competencies, so many areas of our lives are now justiciable by the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, because the EU has, just under the Lisbon Treaty, 45 new areas of competence for virtually every aspect of public policy. Now, that is not something that we bargain for. What I think you can do on protecting the environment is go to Europa 2000 networks, go back to cooperation, and as I think Alec and others have said, we have very high standards in this country. They are protected by our own courts and our own parliament. There is no reason why we should not cooperate to continue to drive forward environmental improvement, as we've done, by the way, in London and around this country, without the need for the coercive power of a supranational court, a supranational system. It is unnecessary and hugely bureaucratic.
Now, listen, we have about 20 minutes left, and I do want to push on just because I want to try and get as many people in as possible. By the way, if you are watching online, remember you can join in. The hashtag is EUDebate. Our next question now from Charlotte Lees. Charlotte.
Hi. So my question is it going to be better or worse for young people trying to get on the property ladder if we leave?
What do you think, Charlotte?
To be honest, I just want some more clarification. As we've mentioned before, for young people and the millennial generation, there's been so much back and forth between each party and obviously each campaign, and I'd like to know if it's going to actually improve if we do leave, or if it's not. I just want to understand a bit further.
Okay, Liz Kendall.
If wages are hit because we leave and you can't get a job, that's going to make it harder for you to get on the property ladder. I mean, actually, I think the solution to the massive housing crisis we've got in this country is within our own hands. I'd like to see us building more affordable homes, councils having more power to borrow to build social and affordable housing, far greater shared ownership. We need a decent construction industry that's got the skills to do that. I think that's all within our power. But I think the risk to our economy of losing jobs and wages being hit if we pull out, which I think most, businesses and serious independent economic organisations think will happen, will make it harder for you to get on the housing ladder, and it's pretty bloody hard as it is already.
Okay, Priti Patel, what's going to happen to first-time buyers?
I take the view that obviously, there are things that government can and should be doing and are doing right now to increase and support house building and more supply, increasing supply of new homes and affordable homes as well. Now, of course, you know, if we were to vote to leave, we'd have new opportunities in strengthening our economy, new opportunities in terms of jobs, and also more economic prosperity as well. So I think Liz is painting an incredibly pessimistic picture, actually, if we were to vote to leave, and what that would mean in terms of house building. Government, of course, would have the chance to spend more of its money on supporting house building, more investment coming in, but also from your own point of view as well. You know, you want to look to a brighter future. You want to be able to choose as well which part of the country you want to live in and what type of home you would like as well, whether it's a flat or a house. And I think actually it's about having the choice, you know, creating the right economic foundations, having that stability, but obviously more housing supply as well, which would of course enable you and many others, give you the greater opportunity to purchase a home for the first time.
Okay, Boris, can you make a point in 10 seconds?
Well, just very briefly, one thing that you can't do at the moment, because we're in the EU, we have a huge shortage of housing in this city, particularly in the whole of the southeast. A lot of the pressure the price pressure is driven by the huge attractiveness of the international market. People want to come to London. People are buying properties from abroad. Now, I think a very attractive policy would be to have a tax on foreign buyers, and to make sure that you know, if they're going to have an asset in this country, then they use it. You cannot do that as long as we are in the EU.
Only Boris had become Mayor of London, he'd have been able to implement such a policy. Instead of which, much of London, as far as I can be, has not been sold to French and Germans. It's been sold to sheikhs and oligarchs who've ended up. We wanted a positive idea. Now, say in this campaign, I would have loved for the Remain side to have taken the £2.5 billion net contribution, the EU migrants, or expats, as we'd call them if they were our people going to Spain. The EU expats who've come to this country, £2.5 billion a year net contribution. For that net contribution, we could hypothecate it to building 100,000 socially rented houses a year across the country. Now, what I'd like to see the Remain campaign do is articulate the benefits that as a country we have from these EU expats and translate it into policies that would actually have a tangible result for the people across the country.
Okay, let's just go back to Charlotte, who asked the question. Charlotte, you look a bit confused. How do you feel about what you've heard? What do you think, having listened to the people on the panel, do you think would be better for a first-time buyer, in or out?
It's hard because obviously nothing's in concrete and we're not going to know until... And the thing is, with leaving, it's not going to be for another 2 years, is it? So, to be honest, it's just a bit concerning, as most of our generation are currently still living at home or spending all their money on rent, and you don't want to live like that forever. So.
Okay, gentleman in the front row, just very quickly. You're from which organisation are you from? You are from...
I'm Benny from Huffington Post.
Huffington Post, right, okay.
Vote Leave have put Turkey's accession to the European Union on much of the literature that's going to people's doors at the moment. And I just wondered, if the UK does vote to remain on June the 23rd, do you think the Prime Minister should commit to a referendum on Turkey's membership of the EU if they ever achieve all 35 chapters required?
Well, at the moment, there is no such commitment from the government, and it is the government policy.
Would you like there to be one then, Boris? Because I'm aware there's not one, which is why I'm asking you.
I think
if you'd like there to be one.
I think it's an issue of very great importance to the people of this country. I think that they deserve to be consulted on it. We don't normally have referendums on accessions, and I think it's very unlikely that the government would grant a referendum on any new accession, and that is not a protection that we have.
But we do have a veto on accession, contrary to what the Leave campaign said. Now, Boris has been too shy on this because he was a signed-up member of Conservative Friends of Turkey, who were campaigning for Turkey's accession to the European Union. So I've now come to the conclusion that Boris wanted Turkey in so he could use it as a scare to make sure the UK voted out. That's the only logical explanation for campaigning for Turkey to come into the European Union, while your own campaign says their membership is a reason.
Actually, there's a very good case for Turkey and the UK having, as William Hague, I think himself said a while back, a new type of associate relationship with the EU. We should be, I think, outside the EU, and I think Turkey.
Do you want Turkey in?
Provided we come out.
Well, there we have it.
I'm all in.
It was the scheme.
I'm all in favour of Turkey coming in, but I want us to come out.
It was the plan.
Okay.
And
unbelievable.
Let's get another audience question now. Our next question, it comes from Kenny Imafidon. Kenny, it's on security. What would you like to say?
So in this whole debate, national security has obviously been a very hot topic, and a lot of times when people hear about national security, it's all about the threats of terrorism. And I guess the big issue is that a lot of the times the threat coming from both campaigns, there's been a lot of fear-mongering and people lying about a lot of stuff and making people feel like the threat's even bigger than it is. And you've had people like the Home Secretary, for example, as we saw the last mayoral elections, saying that London would be more unsafe if another person become mayor. And I guess it looks like you get a lot of political point scoring from making facts to do whether or not Britain will be safer in or out of the EU. So it's a really simple question, it's very direct in regards to, are we going to be safer in or out?
Priti Patel.
Well, I take the view that there are risks if we were to remain in the European Union with regards to our security, on the basis that, you know, we are unable to deport people who've come to Britain and unharmed. The criminal justice system, quite frankly, has prevented us from deporting people. And at the same time, we've had people, for example, individuals such as the former head of Interpol, effectively say that we are exposed to risks, individuals that come to the United Kingdom, and that we cannot do anything to deport them. There is also this point to make as well, that effectively people like Ron Noble have said that currently Europe is a passport-free zone, so people can move through. That poses great threats, obviously, to our national security, to our borders, and that is why I think we'd be safer if we were to leave the European Union on June the 23rd.
Liz Kendall.
We are safer in, and if you don't believe the politicians, and I don't blame you probably if you don't, listen to the former head of MI5 and MI6, to Sir Hugh Auden, Paul Condon, to the head of Europol. You know, we can actually check the data on people's flights now to see who might be a risk of coming into this country.
What about Priti's point, though, that we can't deport? Well,
we can, and we have.
Certain individuals.
We can, and we have. And most of the police chiefs that I speak to tell me we are much more able to quickly deport people or bring them back to justice than we were years ago. That we're going to be able to check their DNA and fingerprints. Actually, there's been huge improvements in terms of sharing information and evidence right across the European Union, and I think that we are safer, and we need to build on that and improve it even more in future.
Priti, we either can or we can't deport people.
Why is it the case? And we have thousands of foreign nationals from the European Union sitting in our prisons right now who we are simply prevented from deporting and taking action against. And this is about the fundamental reason of taking back control. We would be safer outside of the European Union.
We're not prevented from deporting them. We've deported more than 5,000 since 2010. We've brought 675 back. 675 back to face justice. We are not part of the Schengen borderless area. We check the passports of people who came into this country. We've turned away 6,000 since 2010, 2,000 in the last year alone. And most of the serious defence and security experts want us to remain because, you know what? Crime is borderless now, and we need to share information, share data, share evidence to get, to make sure that we remain safe.
Alex Salmond, why would we be safer if we stayed within the EU?
Because cooperation on security matters between democracies is always a good thing to make all of us safer. But Liz is right on this. We have sent 5,000 people back since 2010. That's a lot of people, Priti, that you've actually managed to send back. But the Interpol Euro arrest warrant has been a huge advantage to police forces. Now, if you believe, and the gentleman here asked us a question some time ago, if you believe that the European Union has made a contribution to peace and stability in Europe over the last generation, since the most prolonged period of peace since the Antonine period. If you believe that, and I'm quoting exactly what Boris said 2 years ago, if you actually truly believe that, then why on earth would we exit that organisation which has made a contribution
yes, you can in one
to peace
second.
and stability?
I'm interested to find out, because this is clearly something that people are very worried about. Who in this room feels safer in this country, first of all, being in the EU? Put your hands up, please. Right. Not that many. How many, presumably then, feel safer if we were to come out?
Hardly.
There's a lot of you not putting your hands up. A lot of you are undecided, clearly. There are more people in the room that said they would be happier in than out. Some people didn't put their hand up. Boris, you wanted to quickly come back, very quickly.
Back to the gentleman there and to Alex's point. Actually, what the EU does is, in trying to turn itself into a defence pact, undermines NATO. And if you look at all the areas where the EU has been involved in trying to preserve stability in the European continent, I remember the Bosnia business where the EU was given trust to sort that business out for about 4 years. The EU led on it. It was a total disaster. 1 million people died. NATO eventually came in. The Dayton Accords, you remember the Americans finally took, I remember I reported it in detail.
No. Finally, when you wrote that 2 years ago, you believed it.
Second, I don't think anybody in their right mind could say, whatever you say about Vladimir Putin, he's a tyrant, he's a kleptocrat, and all the rest of it, he certainly is. I don't think that the European Union's diplomacy in Ukraine was very good at all. I think it was a disaster. Now,
2 years ago,
all this undermines the fundamentals of our defence, which are the NATO alliance. You talk about the biggest period of peace since the Antonines.
That was your quote. This was an exact quote from Boris.
Actually, that has been guaranteed.
It was your Antonine.
That has been guaranteed by the NATO alliance.
Okay.
And that is
now listen, we are.
fundamental.
I'm afraid to say we are running out of time. We don't want to end in the middle of a
one brief thing on this.
Conversation.
Very brief.
Briefly means 10 seconds.
Right, jolly jape, isn't it? But 2 years ago, Boris said exactly in his book what I quoted to you a few minutes ago. And if he believed it 2 years ago, he either stopped believing it over the last 2 years, or he has some motivation.
Okay.
And if you believed it 2 years ago, he made a contribution, then you must vote Remain.
Okay, Boris and Alex, thank you very much.
That has been guaranteed by NATO.
Okay, let's move on now. Let's move on.
Gentlemen,
I'm going to have to talk over you. Our final piece of Google Trends data tells us what people make of the prospect of Brexit in the rest of Europe. Google Trends can tell us the top searches relating to the referendum in all 28 member countries, and here's a snapshot of what they are asking. In France, they want to know, will they need a visa to visit the UK if Britain leaves the EU?
No.
In Germany, they are asking why Brexit is bad for London's financial centre. Of course, the Leave campaign would dispute, I think we need to turn your microphone off, would dispute the assumption there. But are those German questioners thinking Brexit would offer an opportunity for Frankfurt to take London's place? And in Spain, one of the top searches is one close to many British hearts. How would Gibraltar be affected by Brexit? And in Poland, a question absorbing many of their expats living here. How would Brexit affect Polish nationals living in the UK? Anyone in the audience? We're running out of time. Keep it very, very brief, please. Gentleman over there in the red patterned shirt, what would you like to say? The microphone is winging its way to you right now. Right. What would you like to say?
I think one of the people forget this, but after the Scots independence referendum, there was this question of the Constitutional Convention that would emerge, where people would discuss what is the role of the UK and what is it. And I think that's something that's being forgot, is that despite the fact we're having this referendum, there is actually a huge amount of uncertainty in what is Britain's role? Who are we? What are we? There are countries falling apart, or are we together? And that's one of the biggest issues here, that when we're trying to vote on the issue of Europe, we still ourselves don't know what we're voting to remain, to be a part of or to be out of, because we're not actually sure what it means to be British.
Okay, anyone else would like to make a point? How about the lady just there with the brown hair? Okay, oh, you've ended up with 2 microphones, lucky you.
Okay, the thing that I was kind of really worried about was that, so the Out campaign say that we need to take back control of our borders, or take back control of Britain. And I'm kind of worried that if we leave the EU, we won't take back control of Britain, but we'll give it to one of the most right-wing Tory governments we've had in recent history. So, who's going to protect us from you guys when it comes to workers' rights, maternity leave, paid holiday, paid sick leave, and, for example, the Human Rights Act, which is something that your government has already said that you might take away from us?
Okay, Priti Patel, very quickly, because I've got 2 questions I want to squeeze in.
Very clear on employment rights and the protection of workers' rights, that we are not looking to change those. So I will emphasise that again this evening. Those rights are enshrined by Parliament. And which government would want to change that, quite frankly? Supporting workers' rights is absolutely the right thing to do, and that's part of our values that we have.
Yeah. Hang on, Liz, very quickly.
I think the people who are dominant in the Leave campaign are really on the right. They want a small state. They don't support the social solidarity or the view that we are stronger when we work together, and that there should be a floor underneath.
John Mann,
Okay,
John Mann, Gisela
I agree with
Stewart.
you.
Last two,
Gisela Stewart, John
the
Mann,
last
Kate
two
Hoey.
questions of the night. It's very important that we get these in, because I did
Total
say
rubbish.
earlier, I think it was to you actually, I said that we were going to come back to this topic. So first, last two questions. Next question from Rita Amin. Rita.
Yeah, if we vote to remain, wouldn't the UK be at a disadvantage negotiating with a begging bowl kind of situation when it comes to EU laws, immigration, trade, and sovereignty?
Okay, hold that thought. And Christopher McConnell, you have a question as well. What would you like to say?
Yes, can you name a club anywhere at any time in human history that treats its former members better than its continuing members?
Okay. On Rita's question, first of all, then, if we remain, do we have any influence? Do we have any power to renegotiate if we stay?
No,
Alex Salmond.
the question's a very good one indeed. I mean, the only way you could mitigate the economic damage is to join EFTA. But if you joined EFTA, you would have to have all the regulations and free movement of labour, but you wouldn't have a say in the decision making. And that's where we come to the gentleman's point. No, there's no example of any organisation which treats its former members better than existing members. But I thought the lady put her finger on it just a few minutes ago. Say, who's going to take control? This mantra that we've been hearing right through this debate and every other debate, take back control. Control for who? It looks to me like control for the most right-wing government since Margaret Thatcher. And all this stuff about you're not going to touch workers' rights. Boris is sitting beside you. He said 2 years ago he would scrap the social chapter. So when you say who's going to do that, Boris would want to do that if he's still arguing for that position. And if you look at the present activities of this government, in terms of what they've done to trade union rights and others, then you've got a good indication that this take back control means control by a government that most people in this country will find very unpalatable indeed.
I think that's an astonishing statement.
Priti, hang on one sec. Well, let's get Christopher McConnell's question, which was, why would any club treat former members better than current members? Boris Johnson.
Well, I cite what about the British Empire, for instance, where actually the United States of America, I think, did pretty well by seceding, don't you think? Well, the Soviet Union was a total disaster, kept lots of nation states glued together in a way that was opaque, remote, anti-democratic, and in the end, they did far better to break up that system. There's nowhere else. It's very interesting your question you raised, because it's not a club. It's totally wrong. It's not a club. It's a system of government. And it's a supranational system that has a single court from which there is no recourse. It's the Supreme Court. We all have to obey its law, and it touches more and more areas. It is totally inscrutable. We don't know who makes our laws. And it's crying out for fundamental reform. The only way to get that reform is to vote Leave it. Take back control.
Okay.
Take back control on June the 23rd.
Liz Kendall.
I mean, to answer the lady's question, I'm actually much more confident about our ability to work with other European countries to get the results that we want. I want to see a Europe that is more focused on jobs and growth. I would like to see centre-left parties elected across Europe so that we have a new agenda that focuses less on kind of jobs for the boys in the Commission, but jobs for our boys and girls in the areas that need them most. I think we can do even more on climate change. I want to see us expand jobs and opportunities in services and digital. And as for the gentleman, I don't see how we can ask to leave and have all the benefits of the single market without any of the costs and without a say over the rules. It doesn't make sense, and I don't believe it will happen. I don't want us to go from being a rule maker to a rule taker.
Okay, Rita, who asked the question, wants to come back in. Just very quickly, Rita.
I just want to ask you that David Cameron didn't get what he wanted in the beginning. Now, if we remain in EU, what is the guarantee that he will get what he wants later on once we
Because I think we have many countries in Europe who want to see an agenda that focuses more on jobs and growth, because they are suffering from unemployment in parts of Europe, terrible unemployment. And we do need to see that change, but the way that we do that is by working with others. As I said, I want to see centre-left parties winning elections so that we can have an agenda that's based on what people want.
Okay.
And I think that we have got a really important role to play in that.
Thank you. Priti Patel.
Well, Rita, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact is, you know, we had our chance at renegotiating our relationship and getting a better deal for Britain, and we simply did not get that deal, you know, on a range of issues. And let's be very clear, there is a risk of remaining in, because the European Union has already set its course. It has the 5 presidents' report. They want more integration. They want more harmonisation. That'll lead to more unaccountability, less transparency. The usual situation will continue. It will be business as usual, and that'll work to our detriment, which is why we need to vote leave. And when it comes to taking back control, I tell you, Alex, who we're taking back control for. We're taking back control for the British public, who quite frankly are disillusioned with their politicians and with successive governments.
Okay, Priti Patel, we will have to leave it there. Priti, thank you very much.
Brussels and London.
Boris, thank you very much. We have to end it there, I'm afraid. We are out of time. That is it from us here at YouTube headquarters. Thank you to our debaters, to Priti Patel, Boris Johnson, Liz Kendall and Alex Salmond. Thanks to our audience and the YouTubers. Thank you. Remember, if you want to join in the debate, go to telegraph.co.uk and to the huffingtonpost.co.uk. Most important of all, do not forget to vote on June the 23rd. Good night.